joined now by my friend Matt Walsh. He's got a new show, The Honorable Judge Walsh. He's also the host of the Matt Walsh Show. The show is judged by Matt Walsh, by the way. Matt, you're a big sports fan, I think, like I am. I cannot get through my head that we have reached a point in time where the argument that men are women and should be able to play women's sports, that even someone like Dawn Staley, South Carolina women's coach, will endorse. Now with the Title IX rules that have come out today from the Biden administration, would you have believed a decade ago that we would be standing where we are right now, that men can win women's championships and much of the country is just totally fine with that?
Actually, a decade ago, we're just on the cusp of where I would say a decade ago this was foreseeable, because it was right around probably about 2014, 2015. I can't remember what year it was when Bruce Jenner came out as Caitlyn Jenner. I think that was 2015.
That's a good point. I mean, you're around my age. We would have never believed this in 2000, let's say.
Yeah, exactly. So it became suddenly apparent we were heading this. It seemed like a sudden shift that happened 8, 9, 10 years ago. But going back before that, even like 2 years before that shift happened, it was unthinkable. And for any point before that in human history, it was unthinkable. And I think even now, for most people, if they're presented with this question of whether men should compete in women's sports, and if they're presented the question in an honest way that they can understand, the vast majority of people will say no. But the problem is that this is not presented in an honest way, and often it's discussed in a way by the media where it's just they discuss it in a way that we're intentionally trying to confuse people. They'll say things like, "Well, conservatives want to ban quote unquote trans women from competing in sports." That's what they'll say, but of course, no one's trying to do that. There's no law anywhere that anyone's proposed that would ban trans-identified people from competing in sports. The issue is just, should males, no matter how they identify, should they be able to compete against females? And of course, we're saying no. Although, if you're trans-identified and you're a male and you want to play sports, you can play sports. You just have to play with your biological category like everyone always has.
What do you think Joe Biden would say if he were asked this question? It's crazy that he hasn't been asked this question in 3.5 years. But if I could, I'm not even kidding about this. If I could ask Joe Biden any question, it would be a straightforward question. Do you believe that men who identify as women should be able to compete against women and win women's championships? It's a very basic question. It's the number one question I would ask him. What do you think he would say? And how crazy is it that in 3.5 years, no one has, to my knowledge, ever asked him?
Yeah, no one's asked him any direct question on any issue that touches this problem. What is a woman? No one's asked him that. Is it okay for children to be chemically castrated? No one's asked him any of that. It is interesting. How would he respond? I mean, given the fact that he's a vegetable and he's obviously not very good at answering any question at all that's not, written ahead of time and he knows it's going to be asked, it's hard to say. I think that he would stumble around and eventually get around to saying something like, it's people have the right to identify however they do, and we should respect how they identify. I think that he would eventually get around to saying that, which of course would be the nonsensical answer, but I think that's where he would ultimately land.
Which is why I give credit to Dawn Staley. I don't agree. I think she's crazy, and I don't even think she agrees with the answer she gave. But she answered it. It's a yes-no question. It's very binary to me, much like gender is. You're either one or the other. You have to take a side. Where do we go from here? I mean, you said, and I think you're right, maybe it was a decade ago, you could potentially predict where we were headed. But in 2000, if you and I had been sitting around talking about sports, I don't think we would have been saying, hey, we're going to talk by 2024, dudes are going to be winning NCAA women's championships. That would have been absolutely insane. Do we see a bounce back to sanity, or does the road to crazy town just get crazier?
I think we do see a bounce back. I mean, I think that we're seeing it right now. I'm not generally accused of being the optimist, but on this particular issue, I think team sanity is winning, because the other side what they're doing, it's unsustainable. It's literally indefensible. It's unjustifiable in a very literal sense. It cannot be justified. There's no argument to be made for it. All they could do is lie and obfuscate. And they've gotten this far so far, largely by confusing people so they don't understand what the issue even is. And also by denying that it's really happening. I mean, that's for the first several years that this was going on, the left would just deny if you brought it up. They would say, oh, that's not really happening. That's not a real issue. But now, like, everybody knows that it's happening, so they can't do that anymore. And I think most people understand, even in spite of all the obfuscation, the confusing language, most people understand the code words now. They understand what's really happening. And now that that's happened, I think that it's only a matter of time before the whole house of cards comes tumbling down. So that's my optimistic view. Maybe I'm wrong, but 10 years from now, I think that we may be in a country where this is basically a thing of the past.
I want to give credit on an optimistic level. I mentioned this earlier. I don't know if you saw this, Matt, but a group of West Virginia middle schoolers decided that they would not compete against I guess it's a boy who's pretending that he's a girl in track and field. This is Bridgeport Middle School in Bridgeport, West Virginia. Should girls who are competing, in your mind, should they step out of competition? Or I give credit to these girls for doing it, or should we not require them to step out of competition, and should adults acknowledge that we have failed to even put the girls in this situation where they have to be braver than the adults when it comes to an issue like this?
Yeah, I would go with the second answer there. First of all, I never put the onus on children to do courageous things and to do courageous things that, as you say, that adults won't even do. Now, it's great when they do. I think we should encourage kids to show courage and to stand up for truth and sanity in a world that's gone mad. But we can't expect that. We certainly can't be angry at them when they don't, especially when, again, we've only gotten to this point because adults have failed. And so we can never expect children to do something that the adults will not do. We as individual adults cannot expect children to do things that we won't do. So I put the onus on the parents, and it's the parents who need to speak up, and the parents who need to make this decision for their children. And if your daughter is in a sport where this is happening, then it's like you need to step in and say, we are not going to participate. Put it on you. Don't put it on your daughter. And I think we see some parents that are starting to do that. But again, that's an area where there needs to be a lot more. Parents need to be emboldened much more to speak up. And I think we see it trending in that direction. I hope it continues.
We're talking to Matt Walsh. He's at the Daily Wire. He's got a new show where he sits on the bench and judges all sorts of issues. How important do you think humor is when it comes to winning some of these battles? And do you think the right, or what I would call sane people, are getting better at humor?
I think, we have an advantage in that the left has basically abandoned the playing field. They're not competing. I mean, it's, as many people like to point out, there hasn't even really been a mainstream comedy film. There haven't been very many anyway in the last 10 years, yes. And there certainly hasn't been a good one in 10 or 15 years. And we kind of had this, what it seems like a golden age of comedy films in the early 2000s era. And then it just stopped. It just seemed to stop right around 2013 or 2014. And that was it. And so this used to be almost exclusively the purview of the left. They were the funniest ones. They were doing all the funny stuff. They were very good at comedy. And now they've backed away from it. And I think it's largely because you just can't. There are too many sensitivities. And also comedy requires you to be self-deprecating. It requires you to not take yourself too seriously, to effectively make fun of and satirize your opponents or people you don't like. You have to at least have a certain sort of affection for them to do it. You have to understand them at least on some level to effectively satirize them. And you just don't find that on the left anymore. So there's a giant void that it's just there for the right to walk into. And I think that we're starting to see that move right now. But I won't say that, it's still, I think there's a lot more that can be done, and to just kind of boldly take this ball that they've left there and run with it.
Certainly, the last time I think I saw you in person was the debut of the movie that was just the story of a bunch of comedy about a bunch of guys who decide to identify as women, lady ballers, and try to win a championship, which is the kind of movie that would have been made in the early 2000s that now nobody will touch. You're doing a judge show. Tell me about that judge show. And then as a secondary part of that, how excited are you as a Ravens fan to watch Lamar Jackson handing off to Derrick Henry?
Yeah, well, on the judge show, it's our courtroom show where I do have legal authority. It's very limited, but I do have actual legal authority over these real cases. And they're real cases, but they are cases that would never be heard in a real courtroom. And so we step in. The rule is that they have to be very, very petty disputes. The pettier, the better. And then I preside over them and I make my judgments, and they are legally binding. To a very limited extent, but they are legally binding. On the Lamar Jackson question, I'm excited about that. The Ravens have been totally decimated as always in free agency. They've just been picked apart, clean almost to the bone. And so at least we got one guy. We have one addition to maybe offset the 25 losses or whatever it was.
I love Derrick Henry. I'm rooting for him to do well. I think that combo, especially on the read option with Lamar Jackson, is going to be exciting to watch. Matt, congratulations on the new show. Appreciate the time. And look forward to running around into you in Nashville at some point in the near future.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
That is Matt Walsh. You can follow him on Twitter. Certainly go check out Judge, the new show that he has on the Daily Wire. And I was just mentioning Baltimore Ravens. Some of you may be fans of the Baltimore Ravens. I'm a fan of the Tennessee Titans. I don't think we're going to be winning anything anytime soon. Several months still to go until training camp starts again. But, man, I'm watching tonight Major League Baseball. I'm going to watch the Atlanta Braves. Some of you are going to be watching the NHL playoffs. You're going to be watching the NBA playoffs. You can get hooked up right now with $100 if you go to prizepicks.com/clay. Prizepicks.com/clay. You can pick more or less on a variety of different players, win up to 100 times your money, 10 times your money, depending on the players that you select and what exactly you can win. It's lots of fun. You can play it in my home state of Tennessee. You can play it in California, Texas, Georgia, 30 states. It's amazing. I'm telling you, you're going to love it. PrizePicks.com. Use my name, Clay, and if you deposit $100, they'll give you $100. I'm not aware of anything else out there where you can get $100 just by signing up and depositing your own $100. That's what you can do for the weekend. Enjoy sports a little bit more than maybe you already were at prizepicks.com. Use that code, Clay.